But while to the immigrant entry to this country was admission to privileges and opportunities eagerly sought, the impact upon the existing population was very different. For reasons which they could not comprehend, and in pursuance of a decision by default, on which they were never consulted, they found themselves made strangers in their own country. They found their wives unable to obtain hospital beds in childbirth, their children unable to obtain school places, their homes and neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition. Their plans and prospects for the future were defeated. At work, they found that employers hesitated to apply to the immigrant worker the standards of discipline and competence required of the native-born worker. They began to hear, as time went by, more and more voices which told them that they were now the unwanted. On top of this, they now learn that a one-way privilege is to be established by Act of Parliament, a law which cannot and is not intended to operate to protect them or redress their grievances. It is to be enacted to give the stranger, the disgruntled and the agent provocateur the power to pillory them for their private actions. In the hundreds upon hundreds of letters I receive, when I last spoke on this subject 2 or 3 months ago, there was one striking feature which was largely new and which I find ominous. All members of Parliament are used to the typical anonymous correspondent, but what surprised and alarmed me was the high proportion of ordinary, decent, sensible people writing a rational and often very well educated letter, who believed that they had to admit their address because it was dangerous to have committed themselves to paper to a member of Parliament agreeing with the views that I had expressed, and they would risk either penalties or reprisals if they were known to have done so. The sense of being persecuted, a persecuted minority, which is growing among ordinary English people in the areas of the country which are affected, is something that those without direct experience can hardly imagine. I'm going to allow just one of those hundreds of people to speak for me. She did give her name and address, which I have detached from the letter which I am about to read. She was writing from Northumberland about something which is happening at this moment in my own constituency. And I'll read it. 8 years ago, in a respectable street in Wolverhampton, a house was sold to a Negro. Now only one white woman, a woman of old age, lives there. This is her story. She lost her husband and both her sons in the war. So she turned her 7-room house, her only asset, into a boarding house. She worked hard and she did well, paid off her mortgage and began to put something by for her old age. Then the immigrants moved in. With growing fear, she saw one house after another taken over. The quiet streets became a place of noise and confusion. Regretfully, her white tenants moved out. The day after the last one left, she was awakened at 7 a.m. by 2 Negroes who wanted to use her phone to contact their employer. When she refused, as she would have refused any stranger at such an hour, she was abused and feared that she would have been attacked but for the chain on her door. Immigrant families have tried to rent rooms in her house, but she has always refused. Her little store of money went, and after paying her rates, she had less than £2 a week. She went to apply for a rate reduction and was seen by a young girl who, on hearing that she had a 7-room house, suggested that she might let part of it. When the lady said the only people she could get were Negroes, the girl said, "Racial prejudice won't get you anywhere in this country." So she went home. The telephone is her only lifeline. Her family pay the bill and help her out as best they can. Immigrants have offered to buy her house at a price which the prospective landlord will be able to recover from his tenants in weeks, or at the most in just a few months. She is becoming afraid to go out of her door. Windows are broken. She finds excreta pushed through her letterbox. When she goes to the shop, she is followed by children, charming, wide-grinning pickaninnies. They cannot speak English, but one word they know: racialist, racialists, they chant. When the new race relation bill is passed, this woman is convinced that she will go to prison. And is she so wrong? I begin to wonder. The other dangerous delusion from which those who are willfully or otherwise blind to realities suffer is summed up in the words integration. To be integrated into a population means to become, for all practical purposes, indistinguishable from the other members. Now, at all times where there are marked physical differences, especially of colour, integration is difficult, though over a period not impossible. There are among the Commonwealth immigrants who have come to live here in the last 15 years or so many thousands whose wish and purpose is to be integrated, and whose every thought and endeavour is bent in that direction. But to imagine that such a thing enters the heads of a great and growing majority of immigrants and their descendants is a ludicrous misconception, and a dangerous one to boot. We are on the verge of a change. Hitherto it has been force of circumstances and of background which has rendered the very idea of integration inaccessible to the greater part of the immigrant population. That they never conceived or intended such a thing, and that their numbers and physical concentration meant the pressures towards integration, which normally bear upon any small minority, do not operate. Now we are seeing the growth of positive forces acting against integration, of vested interests in the preservation and sharpening of racial and religious differences, with a view to the exercise of action dominated first over fellow immigrants and then over the rest of the population. The cloud no bigger than a man's hand that can so rapidly overcast the sky has been visible recently in Wolverhampton and has shown signs of spreading quickly. The words I am about to use verbatim as they appeared in the local press on the 17th of February of this year are not mine, but those of a Labour minister, a member of Parliament. The Sikh community's campaign to maintain customs inappropriate to Britain is much to be regretted. Working in Britain, particularly in the public services, they should be prepared to accept the terms and conditions of that employment. To claim special communal rights, or should one say rights, leads to a dangerous fragmentation within society. This communism is a canker. Whether practiced by one colour or another, it is to be strongly condemned. All credit to John Stonehouse for having had the insight to perceive that and the courage to say it. For these dangerous and diversive elements, the legislation proposed in the Race Relations Bill is the very pabulum they need to flourish.